Hello everyone, welcome back to Time to Cook with Jess. I hope that you guys have been enjoying my previous video. If you haven't watched it yet, just make sure that you go into my profile and you'll be able to find it for the pretzels. Other than that, today I am going to be bringing you guys a brand new video. This is a recipe that I've made before. Throughout the video, I have tweaked some of the ingredients and measurements, so I will make sure to put that into the description and the video itself, so just keep an eye out for that. If you stay for the end of the video, you'll be able to see that I made 3 different recipes in this video itself, so I really hope that you guys enjoy. If you have any suggestions or if you try to make this recipe, please let me know in the comments. I'm very excited to see if other people try to experience this as well. Again, if you are watching and you enjoy this, make sure that you subscribe, and thank you so much for viewing. Alright everybody, so for today's recipe, we are going to be making some delicious ciabatta loaves. Here I have all of my tools and ingredients laid out. Here I have some all-purpose flour, salt, dry yeast, and a whole milk and water mixture at room temperature. On this side, I also have a sponge which I have prepped the night before. This is a necessary step for your loaves since this is what gives it the airiness and signature crumb for this loaf. I will go into further detail about how a sponge works in a different video. Okay, for starters, you want to prepare your sponge the night before in order to let it rise for a minimum of 6 hours and up to 24 hours. For the sponge, you'll need to mix 1 cup of all-purpose flour, half a cup of water, and half a teaspoon of yeast. Okay, now I'm going to be weighing out my ingredients. Make sure to set your scale to ounces. Now that my scale is set, I am going to be pouring in my flour. The recipe I'm using calls for 10 ounces of flour, however I tweaked it and ended up using a total of 12 to 13 ounces instead. After using this recipe before, this is just what worked best for me. I did not add the entire 13 ounces at once to not tamper with the integrity of the dough. Add your extra flour gradually. Now add 1.5 teaspoons of salt and half a teaspoon of yeast. Now that we have all of our dry ingredients together, we are going to whisk until they're well incorporated. Now I'm just setting my bowl onto the stand mixer while I work on my wet ingredients. Okay, now we'll be adding our water and milk mixture into our sponge. I personally do not like using a whisk for this, so I'm going to be using a wooden spoon instead. Add the mix gradually and stir to combine. Okay, now that our wet ingredients are mixed, I'm going to be moving my stand mixer in with my flour. For this dough, I am going to be using a paddle attachment instead of a dough hug. Again, this is just something that worked best for me. Now I'm going to add in my wet ingredients gradually while mixing at a low to medium speed for about 2 to 3 minutes. Okay, now make sure that you're scraping down your bowl often, and we are going to continue mixing our dough, but now at a higher speed, at about medium to high. So here I am adding my extra flour, and the reason I add more is because your dough should pull away from the bowl and wrap around the paddle attachment. I am adding 1 teaspoon at a time. This may seem slow, but patience is key and the results are worth it. Now here is what you want your dough to do. It should have a nice shiny look to it as it wraps around your paddle attachment. Now that your dough is fully wrapped, it is ready to be proofed. Grab a big bowl and spray it with oil liberally so your dough does not stick. You're free to drizzle olive oil if you don't have any oil spray. Alright, now that my dough is ready, I'm going to grab a rag to cover the bowl and set this in my proofing oven for about 1 hour. Alright, now that it's been 1 hour, this is what my dough looks like. It should have a slime-like consistency. And I'm going to be grabbing a dough scraper to fold in my dough. Here's the scraper I'm using, and I'm going to start scraping my dough towards the middle 8 times. If your dough sticks to your scraper like mine did, just oil the scraper and it'll keep that from happening. Now set your dough to proof for another 30 minutes. Now while I wait for my dough to proof, I am going to be making a homemade pesto sauce to use with this bread. This is my own recipe, so if you wish to add or take off ingredients, you're welcome to do so. So here I'm going to be working with 27 grams of garlic, 55 grams of pine nuts, 45 ml of olive oil, 60 grams of parmesan, and about 60 to 70 leaves of fresh basil. And I'm going to start with my pine nuts. I am going to grind these down little by little whilst adding olive oil as well. You don't need to use a mortar and pestle. You can also use a food processor or blender. And now we add our garlic and continue grinding. Now I'm adding in my basil leaves gradually. I rip these up to help the grinding. Okay, as cool as it is to use a mortar and pestle, it is very tedious, so I moved onto a blender instead. Now we're just going to continue adding the rest of our ingredients. And finally, I am adding in my cheese. I usually add pecorino and parmesan, but I only had parmesan, so I'm working with what I got. And here's my pesto. Alright, it's been 30 minutes, and this is how my dough looks. Look at how bubbly it is. And now we're going to fold it in another 8 times and set it to proof for another 30 minutes. And this will be the final proofing. While my dough proofs, I'm going to set a long piece of parchment paper and lightly coat it with some flour so that my dough is easy to lift when handling it with my hands. And here's my dough after its last proofing. Now we're just going to pop this onto our paper. You will have to help your dough out a little bit since it is super tacky. It might be a little messy, but this is the consistency that you want for your dough. Now I'm flouring my scraper to fold the sides in to get more of a rectangle shape. At this point, you want to start preheating your oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I'm flouring a steel scraper to begin cutting down the middle and create 2 loaves. I also recommend adding more flour to your surface. I learned that the hard way. And don't feel discouraged if the dough is super sticky, just be patient with it. Alright, here I'm just trying to roll my dough over gently so that I can begin folding it into thirds. You're going to fold this as if it were a letter. Now that I took care of my dough, I'm going to spray some oil on a baking sheet and place another piece of parchment paper on it so that it stays in place. Now I'm going to grab my loaves and transfer them to my baking sheet. With my floured fingertips, I'm also going to start poking the dough until I have a 7 to 8 inch long loaf. Okay, this is how my loaves turned out. I'm going to bake them for 26 minutes and turn the sheet around halfway through baking. The recipe I'm using calls to bake it for 30 minutes. However, I come to learn that that is too long for my oven. Since every oven is different, keep that in mind. Alright, and this is how my loaves turned out. I'm just going to dust off any excess flour. And here are some clear images of how my loaves turned out. These were so much fun to make. Stay for the end so that you can see the sandwiches that I made with these. Okay, so here I'm just going to be slicing up some salad tomatoes, and on top I have my homemade pesto sauce, shredded parmesan, and whole slices of fresh mozzarella. I forgot to record my first slice, but here I am cutting my square in half. And now I'm going to be spreading my pesto onto my ciabatta. Here comes my father-in-law to ensure that the loaves are perfect. Now I'm going to be adding my tomato slices, mozzarella, and my parmesan. Here I decided I wanted to add some balsamic vinegar to complete this sandwich. And here's the final look. I really hope that you guys enjoyed these recipes. If you did, make sure that you subscribe, and thank you for watching.